Hello guys, and welcome back to another cold episode. On today's episode, as you can tell by the title and the thumbnail, I wanted to talk about the Anti-Spell Festival. And yes, I do believe that the Anti-Spell Festival was a mistake, and that Konami wasn't intending for this to be the event that we got for right now. Or, more specifically, I don't think they wanted this event to correspond with the current cards that are in the shop. So, let's talk about the cards in the shop first, and then we'll talk about the Anti-Spell Festival, and more so why I think that that is just overall a bad event. So first and foremost, the new cards that have come out are all spell-reliant in some way. Whether they are pendulum strategies, which are spells inherently, or they entirely rely on your opponent having to activate a spell card, like for example with the Soul of the Supreme King, you banish this card from the graveyard, if your opponent activates a spell card or effect. Interesting. Or we have things like the Scare Claws, which really heavily require their spells, like Straddle, as well as their field spell. We also have the Valence, which, let alone being pendulums, are also reliant on their field spells, like almost entirely on their field spells. And you start to realize that an Anti-Spell Festival doesn't really make sense given this latest pack. However, it would make sense with Labyrinth. See, Labyrinth is an archetype of monsters that utilize normal spells in order to gain powerful advantage. They have things like Welcome Labyrinth to special summon monsters, as well as incredible synergy with normal traps. Things like Trap Trick, things like Compulse, and the like are very advantageous for this archetype. As well as if you were to pair this with some new support coming out for a myriad of other decks, as well as just like other decks in general, like the Punk Therion stuff that really rely heavily on monsters, most notably the Punk stuff that can search out traps, and the like. These are support cards or new cards that would have been added to help boost strategies that specifically didn't use spells. Now, while Labyrinth does have 2 spells, they're not necessary to play the deck. And while they would have been a limitation, especially not having Labyrinth, it is still something that you can definitely play with just the traps and the monsters. Hence, a really good idea for an Anti-Spell Festival, or a festival that doesn't rely on utilizing the spell effects of your monsters. Hence, you would still have things like the Amazement stuff, you would still have the Labyrinth, as well as other such decks. However, things like Ghost Trick or what have you do really heavily rely on their spells. So even if we look at the loner decks, which also technically rely pretty heavily on spells, dinosaurs really utilize spells. However, paired with the Dinomorphia, sure, you can get around that, I guess. We also have the Pendulums, which are spells inherently, and also heavily rely on actual spell cards, not the pendulum cards, but more spells in order to actually get their plays off, because other than like Time Pendulum Graph, what are pendulums doing without spell cards? Not much, you know. And then you have Amazement, which, sure, this one can work without spells. That's not really that big of a deal. But the fact of the matter is that Amazement without spells is kind of the same with most trap decks, like, you know, Labyrinth or Punk or something like that, where, sure, you don't really need trap cards, right? Whereas, again, Ghost Trick and Pendulum and all of these other things that actually came out at the time and are used in the event don't really make sense. They don't really correspond. So, again, a little bit of a mistake. Now, with that being said, it would have been nice to actually have the Labyrinth stuff. Sure, Scareclaw is fine, but it's also not, like, the best, and the Pendulum support is nice. I think Beyond the Pendulum is great, especially if they had banned Electromite, but Electromite is still a thing, so you could just make Electromite. But honestly, this just doesn't feel like it was meant to be. It feels like this entire pack was just kind of cobbled together real quickly because something else wasn't ready. I couldn't tell you why it wasn't ready, but yeah, this really doesn't feel like something that was supposed to go together. What is the synergy between the Scareclaw stuff that came out, the Valence stuff that came out, and the other random pendulum support? Not a whole lot, especially since a lot of them came out in different sets, right? The Scareclaw came out way before the Valence. Valence is a newer deck by a long shot, and the fact that it came out along with the Scareclaw stuff, along with the pendulum stuff, it really just feels disconnected and as if they just needed a set to release real quick, and this was the easiest one, which I don't know how pendulums were easier, but alas, there you go. So it feels like maybe they had half of the decks put together and not the rest. On top of that, an anti-spell festival with pendulums makes no sense. Pendulums are spells. Konami has said this time and time again. Pendulums are spells. They act the same way that spells do. You cannot play them under anti-spell fragrance, which, yeah, because they're spells. Like, okay, that makes sense. They're monsters and spells. You can play them in the pendulum zone as a spell. Therefore, under anti-spell fragrance, you shouldn't be able to play them. Why is it that they are playable in the anti-spell festival? Well, because we just released a huge pack that is all about pendulums. Throw them in there so that you can actually play the new cards. At the very least, you can play something, right? That's the idea. Now let's talk about the actual event itself. That being the Anti-Spell Festival, which is a terrible idea. Let me just say that right now. Getting rid of a third of the cards in the entire game that mostly rely on allowing you to come back into the game, as well as adding consistency to your strategy, means that without those, the decks just kind of suck. They're really boring. They're mostly monster mash heavy decks, or they are utilizing traps to just prevent your opponent from playing the game, and then there's not really a great way to come back into the game, right? Something like Forbidden Droplets is a great way to, stabilize your deck and to more easily come back into a game, whereas without the spells, you're not really able to do that. Also, again, pendulums exist. Why even do an anti-spell festival if you're not going to get rid of pendulums? Or, more likely, why even do an anti-spell festival? Because you're getting rid of not only all of the spell cards, but you're also getting rid of an entire summoning mechanic, that being pendulum. So, therefore, you have to make an entire rule around having spells that are specifically pendulums, which then defeats the purpose, because now you just play pendulum cards in a lot of the situations that you would have played actual spells, i.e. Archfiend Eccentric. It's basically MST. That's it. That's the only reason that it's there. It's a way to deal with back row that isn't a back row. That isn't a trap card that you have to set. Okay. This, again, just kind of goes into that issue where it really doesn't feel like this event was well thought out. On top of the fact that, the ban list was pretty mediocre as well. Here, let's look at that. So here are all of the banned, limited, and forbidden, and semi-limited cards in the festival. This is a significantly smaller list than most other lists. Now, granted, all of the spell cards are banned, so there's that, but there's a lot of things here that are missing, that are just straight up not there that straight up should be there, right? Sure, a lot of the floodgates are banned, which is nice, but that's basically it. Some of the self-burn and stuff like that, sure, great, understandable. And then they have limited Revolt and Eradicator Epidemic Virus, I guess, because they want people to play traps. And then Solemn Judgment. Okay, and then a whole bunch of burn cards. Again, what? It seems so disconnected, and as if they came up with this at a split decision, not really thinking about the meta or what could potentially be problematic, other than Tri-Brigade because Revolt. They don't really play a whole lot of spells. Limit Revolt. Okay, sure, where's the limitation to Trap Trick or to Eldritch or to this, that, or the other thing? There are a myriad of other decks that are just problematic in this format. Adamancipator, they still have Block Dragon, right? It feels like they didn't really think this one through, right? I mean, they even banned Royal Decree so that you could play your traps, but then also prevented you from playing Denko Sekka to deal with traps. It feels very disconnected and not like they actually had a lot of time to really think about what was going on and just kind of banned all the floodgates. So, yeah. I feel like this event, or at the very least this event and this pack, were not supposed to come out at this time. I feel like most likely the event was the one that wasn't supposed to happen, and the event was supposed to be something else entirely. But they, for some reason, decided to change it up. I don't know why. I don't know what the reasoning was behind this, nor why they would have changed it in any capacity to what we got. I think the Anti-Spell Festival could have been something at least remotely interesting and at least better than the Synchro Festival, but instead this is, once again, probably the worst event that we have had. Somehow Konami has slipped in its quality, there we go, in its quality assurance, and hasn't kept up with the just success that they had in the first couple of iterations of these festivals. Things like the NR Festival was absolutely amazing. A lot of people really liked the Limit 1 Festival, right? And I'm not saying that the Anti-Spell Festival just isn't good and that you shouldn't like it. If you enjoyed this festival, great. You totally can enjoy that. That's not what I'm saying. What I'm saying is that the overall experience seems to be worse in terms of quality assurance and just quality in general than a lot of the other festivals. The NR Festival was pretty good, and that was one of the first ones, and somehow they have continually been getting worse. The ban lists, I think, have been getting better, that's for certain. I mean, this is a decent ban list, but it's not perfect, right? There are definitely some flaws with it, and a lot of the other ban lists as well have had some decently big, flaws. Like, for example, when the Flunder deck came out, and they just left that entirely untouched in that festival. It was basically just Flunder. I forget what, I think it was the No Extra deck festival or something like that, which, good on you, Konami. Great, well done. But the fact of the matter is that I really don't see this event corresponding with this pack and corresponding at this time, and it just feels so rushed, and it's disappointing. And that's all I wanted to say, basically. Let me know what you guys thought of this event. I found it to be really bad, and I really didn't enjoy it. As you can see, I still haven't even gotten all of the gems for this event, and we only have 2 more days. So, there's that. But anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. I hope that you guys did indeed enjoy it. If you did, a like is very much so appreciated. And if you want to check out more content like this, as well as more Yu-Gi-Oh, then just be sure to subscribe. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching, and remember to always stay frosty. Bye-bye. Shout out to the Frost Guard, my members. Thank you guys so much for the support, and I hope you enjoy the content.